If you had done something with your life, I wouldn't have to explain you to people. My husband said that to my face while passing the mashed potatoes. There were 23 people at the table. His sister Vanessa chuckled into her napkin. My daughter Sophia stared down at her plate like she just remembered something urgent about green beans. My mother-in-law lifted her glass and pretended she hadn't heard it. And then Marcus added the line he'd been perfecting for 6 years. She's just not built to provide. Somewhere in the house a phone vibrated. Not mine, his. And before the night was over, that vibration would tear the story he'd told about me into pieces. But this didn't start at that table. It started with rain against a windshield, a hospital hallway that smelled like bleach and burnt coffee, and a choice that cost me more than my pride. Before I go on, if stories about quiet strength and messy families mean something to you, stay with me. Now let me take you back to October 6 years earlier. The night I learned how quickly a woman's worth can be rewritten. My name is Rachel Ann Brennan. I'm 43 years old. 6 years ago, I wasn't a failure. I was a supply chain coordinator for a regional pharmaceutical distributor outside Minneapolis. It wasn't glamorous. I didn't wear designer suits. I wore comfortable flats and carried a tablet that tracked shipments across 3 states. I managed inventory systems for medical supply companies that operated around the clock. I made $78,000 a year. Covered the mortgage. It covered Sophia's dance fees. It covered the dinner parties Marcus liked to host where he'd introduce me as the logistics brain with a laugh that sounded affectionate if you didn't listen too closely. I showed up. I worked. I provided. The call came at 2:17 in the morning on a Wednesday. I remember the exact minute because I just turned over in bed when my phone lit up on the nightstand. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Ms. Brennan, a nurse asked when I answered. This is Abbott Northwestern Hospital. Your father was admitted about an hour ago. My father, Robert, lived alone in a small townhouse 20 minutes away. He'd always been stubborn about it. I raised you and your brother on my own, he'd say. I can handle a thermostat and a grocery run. That night, he'd collapsed in his living room. Minor stroke, that's what the doctor called it. Minor, like that word made it less terrifying. I was dressed before the nurse finished speaking. I told Marcus. He sat up, hair disheveled, irritation already forming. Ratch, we have the Hendersons coming for brunch tomorrow. My dad's in the ER. Marcus sighed. Not the kind that comes from fear, the kind that comes from inconvenience. Call your brother, he said. My brother lives in Seattle. He didn't respond to that. Just rolled over. Keep me updated, he murmured. The drive to the hospital was 37 minutes in rain that blurred every street light. I gripped the steering wheel hard enough my knuckles hurt. When I walked into the room, my father looked smaller. That's what stays with you. Not the monitors, not the 4-line. Just how small a person can look in a bed with white sheets tucked too tight. His speech was slurred, right arm weak, but his eyes were clear. You came, he whispered. Of course I came. I didn't know then how many times I'd hear that sentence in my head over the next 6 years. You came. The neurologist explained the rehab plan. Physical therapy 3 times a week. Occupational therapy. Someone needed to be there for at least a few months while he regained strength. Insurance would cover part of it. Not enough. I did the math in my head while he spoke. I'd have to reduce hours, maybe shift to part-time temporarily, maybe take a lesser role. I didn't hesitate. Some decisions aren't strategic. They're instinct. When I told Marcus the next morning that I'd requested a reduced schedule to help with Dad's rehab, he went quiet. Not shocked. Quiet. Calculating quiet. And how long is that supposed to last? He asked. A few months, maybe 6. He crossed his arms. You're going to tank your career for this. It's temporary. He stared at me like I just admitted something unforgivable. Do you have any idea what people will say? That you couldn't handle the pressure? He's my father. And I'm your husband. The way he said it felt like a competition. That night at brunch with the Hendersons, he made a joke. Rachel's taking a little sabbatical from work, he said, smiling brightly. Personal growth phase. Everyone laughed politely. I didn't correct him. I told myself it didn't matter. It was temporary. 6 weeks later, my supervisor called me into her office. Budget constraints, performance metrics. They needed someone full-time in the role. I stepped down. My salary dropped to $52,000. The jokes changed tone. At family dinners, Vanessa would ask, "So how's early retirement treating you?" Marcus started using a phrase I'd never heard him use before. "Rachel's figuring things out," like I was a college student who couldn't pick a career path. What nobody saw were the 5:30 in the morning sessions when I helped my father grip a spoon again. The way he'd grit his teeth during therapy exercises. The $420 monthly gap in his medication coverage I quietly filled. I didn't talk about it. Not because I was ashamed, because every time I tried to explain, Marcus would cut in. "Let's not make everything about that," he'd say softly, pressing his napkin to his lips like he was managing a scandal. And slowly, over months that turned into years, the narrative hardened. Rachel couldn't provide. Rachel lacked ambition. Rachel was comfortable being small. By the time Sophia turned 17, I could feel it in the way she introduced me to friends. "This is my mom," she'd say. And then nothing else. No job title, no detail, just mom. One Sunday evening after another dinner where Vanessa had asked if I needed help updating my resume, I stood at the sink washing plates while Marcus scrolled through his phone. "You know," he said without looking up, "if you'd push yourself more, we wouldn't be in this position." "What position?" He finally looked at me. "The one where I have to explain you." "Explain me." That was the first time he said it. 6 years later, he'd refine it into a line that would land like a verdict in front of 23 people. But at that sink with soap sliding down my wrists and the house quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator, I realized something else. I didn't want applause. I wanted control of my own story. I just didn't know yet how much that would cost. And I definitely didn't know that one day in the middle of a family dinner, his phone would buzz and the whole room would finally look at me differently. The first time I heard someone else call me a failure, it wasn't my husband. It was my daughter. She didn't say it to my face. She said it to a friend in the driveway, not knowing I was standing behind the half-open garage door. "Yeah, my dad basically handles everything," Sophia said, shrugging. "My mom's around. Around, not useless, not unemployed, just peripheral furniture with a pulse." I didn't confront her. I went back inside and made sure my father had taken his afternoon medication. That was the pattern back then. Swallow it. Keep moving. There wasn't room for ego when someone depended on you to stand. But here's what nobody understood about those years. I wasn't drifting. I was caring. After I stepped down from my coordinator role, I moved into contract work, short-term assignments, inventory audits, troubleshooting supply chain failures at 2 in the morning in warehouses that smelled like cardboard and diesel. The pay was inconsistent, but the hours were flexible enough that I could take Dad to therapy 3 mornings a week. His progress was slow, painfully slow. He'd sit at the edge of his bed, jaw set, trying to lift his right arm higher than the day before. Some mornings he'd look at me and say, "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do," I'd answer. And I meant it. Marcus saw the bank statements. He saw the smaller deposits. What he didn't see were the late nights after I got home from Dad's house when I'd sit at the kitchen table long after everyone was asleep. That table became my second job. It started with a problem I noticed in one of the warehouses I was contracted to audit. Their inventory management was a mess, reactive instead of preventive. Stockouts cost them customers, sometimes contracts. I'd spent 15 years in supply chain operations. I knew the bottlenecks. I knew the patterns. So I built a spreadsheet, then a better one. Then I started teaching myself basic data visualization tools to streamline reporting. Nothing fancy, just enough to eliminate wasted hours. The warehouse manager asked for a copy. Then another facility did. Then someone in Duluth called after hearing about it through a vendor. I didn't call it a business, not yet. It was just something I was building quietly at 11:30 at night with a cup of reheated tea, and the hum of the dishwasher in the background. Marcus would walk past, sometimes glance at the laptop screen. "You're still playing with that," he'd say. "It's not playing." He'd shake his head. "Rachel, you need a real plan." I didn't argue. I didn't tell him that the real plan he wanted had already cost me once. Because there had been another opportunity. 2 years after Dad's stroke, a national logistics company offered me a full-time operations manager role. Higher salary, benefits, stability. I hadn't told Marcus right away, not because I wanted to hide it, because I didn't want to hear it torn apart before it was real. The offer letter came through on a Thursday. On Friday morning, HR called. "Ms. Brennan," the woman said carefully, "we've received some concerning information regarding your reliability. My chest went cold. From whom? There was a pause. A family member reached out to express concern about ongoing personal obligations that might interfere with your ability to commit long-term. I didn't need her to say more. Only one person had known. When I asked Marcus about it that night, he didn't deny it right away. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said I was trying to protect us. From what? From you failing again. If you take on something you can't handle, it reflects on all of us. You told them I couldn't commit. You can't, he said simply. Your father will always come first. The way he said it, flat, certain, felt less like an accusation and more like a sentence being read aloud. I slept in the guest room that night. Not because we were fighting, because I needed space to think. The next morning I made a decision. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet shift. If visibility could be weaponized against me, then I would build without it. I registered an LLC under my middle name, Montgomery Solutions. No social media, no announcements, no big declarations, just contracts. The first year, I had 4 clients, small distribution centers within a 100-mile radius. I drove to each one myself, sat with their operations managers, reworked their inventory forecasting models, built them systems that reduced waste and improved fulfillment rates. Revenue that year, $68,000. Not impressive on paper, but it doubled what I'd made freelancing. I reinvested everything. By year 2, word spread, not through marketing, through warehouse supervisors and procurement managers talking over lunch breaks. Call Rachel, they'd say, she'll fix the chaos. Revenue climbed to $195,000. I hired 1 remote assistant to help with scheduling and client communications. Marcus noticed the extra deposits but assumed they were sporadic contracts. You're finally catching up, he'd say, half smiling. See what happens when you try. Try. He had no idea I'd been trying for years. At family dinners, nothing changed. Vanessa still made comments about my side hustle. My mother-in-law still avoided eye contact when money came up. Marcus still filled in the blanks whenever someone asked what I did. She consults, he'd say vaguely. It's flexible. Flexible like that meant disposable. I didn't correct him. Not because I agreed, because I was building something too fragile to expose. By year 3, Montgomery Solutions had clients in 4 states. Warehouses, mid-size manufacturing plants, a regional grocery chain. Revenue crossed $1.2 million. I still drove the same sedan, still wore the same comfortable flats. I paid off my father's remaining medical debt quietly. I paid down our mortgage principal without telling Marcus the full source. And still at dinner tables, he'd lean back in his chair and say if I didn't push her, she'd still be floating. Floating. The truth was I was standing on ground I built myself. He just hadn't looked down yet. But soon he would. Because in less than a year, a private equity firm out of Chicago would call me about acquiring a majority stake. And the article announcing it would go live on the same night Marcus planned his biggest family dinner yet. He just didn't know it. Neither did I. Not yet. The first time someone said my company's name in a boardroom voice, I thought they were talking about someone else. Ms. Montgomery, we've been tracking your growth for 18 months. That's what the woman from Keystone Capital said over speakerphone one Tuesday morning in March. Ms. Montgomery, not Rachel. Not the wife who couldn't provide. Not the woman Marcus introduced with a sympathetic tilt of his head. Montgomery was my middle name, the one I'd used when I registered the LLC because it felt neutral, detached, harder to sabotage. We're interested in discussing a strategic investment, the woman continued. Possibly a majority acquisition, depending on valuation. I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of a distribution center outside Bloomington. Snow was melting along the curb in gray ridges. I had dust on my hands from inspecting a storage system 20 minutes earlier. I looked down at those hands and tried to process what she just said. Valuation, I repeated. Yes. Based on our preliminary review, we'd be looking at a range between 32 and 36 million. 32 to 36 million. For a moment the world felt very small and very loud at the same time, like standing too close to a passing train. I think you might have the wrong firm, I said automatically. A soft chuckle came through the line. We don't. That call lasted 43 minutes. By the end of it, we had a non-disclosure agreement drafted and a meeting scheduled in Chicago. When I hung up, I didn't cheer. I didn't call anyone. I sat in the car and watched steam rise from the pavement. 6 years of being spoken about instead of spoken to had trained me to distrust good news. Success in my experience attracted interference. So I told no one. Not Marcus, not Sophia, not even my father. The due diligence process began quietly. Keystone's analysts requested financial statements, client contracts, operational metrics. They were thorough, surgical. They didn't care about my family story. They cared about retention rates and cost savings. That felt clean. For the first time in years, I was being evaluated on numbers instead of narrative. The first in-person meeting took place on the 22nd floor of a glass building overlooking Lake Michigan. I wore the same navy blazer I'd bought at a clearance rack 5 years earlier. It still fit. 3 partners sat across from me. 2 women, 1 man, all composed, all calm. Your growth has been disciplined, one of the women said, flipping through a packet. No unnecessary expansion. No vanity hires. I almost laughed at that. No vanity hires. If they'd seen my dinner table, they might have added a footnote. We talked strategy, scaling, integration. They asked about my long-term vision. I want the systems to work without chaos, I said. Warehouses don't need heroes. They need reliability. The woman nodded. And you? I'm fine working in the background. That wasn't humility. It was habit. By early summer, we had a tentative agreement. A majority acquisition at $35 million with me retaining a minority stake and staying on as head of operations for 2 years. I signed the preliminary documents in a conference room that smelled faintly of polished wood and expensive coffee. My hands were steady. What surprised me most wasn't the number. It was the absence of triumph. I didn't feel like a woman who'd conquered anything. I felt like someone who'd survived long enough to be seen. The official announcement would go live after closing. Keystone's communications team drafted a press release. Trade journals would run it. A regional business paper had already expressed interest in a feature piece. Do you want to notify family before publication? The PR coordinator asked over email. I stared at that line for a long time. Did I? I pictured Marcus at the dining table explaining me to people like I was an unfinished project. I pictured Vanessa's smirk. I pictured Sophia's shrug. I typed 1 sentence in response. No advanced notice necessary. The closing date was set for October 14th. Marcus's annual fall dinner was October 14th. I didn't plan that. I didn't request it. Keystone's calendar had been locked in weeks before I connected the dates. When I realized, I sat at the kitchen table and let the coincidence settle over me like dust. If I told him beforehand, he would spin it. He would say he'd pushed me. He would say his standards made me rise. He would claim it as shared victory. And maybe that would have been easier. But I thought about the job opportunity he'd quietly undercut, the HR call he'd justified as protection. Visibility had cost me once. This time I would let the truth arrive without a filter. 3 nights before the closing, my father noticed something different in me. We were sitting in his living room. The evening light slanted through the blinds, catching dust in the air. You're quieter than usual, he said. That's impressive, I replied. I've been quiet for years. He smiled faintly. This is different. I hesitated. I might be selling the company. His eyebrows rose. Might? It's nearly finalized. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said something I'll never forget. Make sure you're not doing it to prove anything. I swallowed. I'm not. Good, he said. Proving yourself to the wrong people is a full-time job. On October 14th, I drove home from Chicago with signed documents in my briefcase and a wire transfer pending. $35 million. I stopped at a rest area halfway down the interstate and sat on a bench overlooking a line of trees just starting to turn red. I thought I'd feel vindicated. Instead, I felt steady, like I'd been carrying a weight so long I'd forgotten what upright felt like. That evening, Marcus texted me from home. Don't be late. Everyone's coming by 6. Everyone. His parents, Vanessa and her fiancé, the Hendersons, a few neighbors he liked to impress, Sophia's college roommate. 20+ witnesses to whatever story he wanted to tell. I drove the rest of the way in silence. At 5:42 in the evening, as I turned onto our street, my phone buzzed. Email notification. Subject line: Montgomery Solutions acquired by Keystone Capital for $35 million. The article was live. So were the trade alerts. So were the push notifications. I parked the car, sat for a moment with the engine off. Inside that house, my husband was setting the table. He still believed he was the one holding the narrative. In less than 20 minutes, his phone would buzz. And this time, the room wouldn't laugh. At 5:58 in the evening, I walked through the front door with a briefcase that felt heavier than it should have. The house smelled like rosemary chicken and roasted garlic. Marcus liked his dinners to smell expensive. He believed scent could do what conversation sometimes couldn't: impress people into silence. Finally, he said from the kitchen without turning around, "Don't track anything in. Vanessa's fiancé is wearing white." I set my keys on the console table. The familiar rhythm of the evening unfolded like it always did. Glasses clinking, music playing softly, some curated playlist Marcus used every fall to signal taste. I moved through the house, shaking hands, nodding, smiling. "Rachel," my father-in-law said, gripping my shoulder. "How's work these days?" Before I could answer, Marcus slid in beside him. "She's consulting," he said lightly. "Keeps her busy." Busy. That word had replaced provide. I felt the weight of the briefcase in my hand. $35 million in signed agreements, years of midnight spreadsheets, hundreds of warehouse floors, thousands of quiet decisions, and still I was busy. Dinner was called at 6:30 sharp. 22 people settled around our extended table, assembled from 2 separate pieces and hidden under a cream linen cloth Marcus ironed himself. He liked details. Details made him feel in control. I sat near the middle, Sophia across from me, Vanessa 2 seats down. My father wasn't there. He rarely attended anymore. Too much strain. Too many subtle digs disguised as jokes. Plates were passed. Wine poured. For the first half hour it was easy talk. Real estate, college applications, someone's new hybrid car. Then, as it always did, the conversation shifted toward money. Vanessa leaned back in her chair. "So Rachel," she said with a grin, "still running that side project?" Few polite chuckles. I felt Sophia's eyes flick toward me. Before I could speak, Marcus dabbed his mouth with his napkin. "It's more of a passion thing," he said smoothly. "She's happiest when she's tinkering." Tinkering. I met his eyes. "I run a consulting firm," I said evenly. Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "Consulting what?" "Operational systems." "For who?" She pressed. Marcus's smile tightened. "Small clients." "It's flexible." Flexible. I'd heard that word so many times it felt like a nickname. The irony was almost funny. The clients weren't small anymore. The contracts weren't flexible. The systems I built were about to be integrated across 5 states under Keystone's portfolio. But at that table, none of it existed yet. Because the truth hadn't buzzed. Sophia shifted in her seat. "Dad's the one keeping everything steady," she said lightly. "He's the real backbone." There it was. Not malicious, not cruel, just absorbed narrative. I looked at her, saw the uncertainty beneath the confidence. She was 19. She'd grown up watching one version of events. "You know your mom worked nights for 3 years. My father-in-law muttered almost to himself. Marcus shot him a look. "Let's not romanticize," he said gently. "Everyone works hard." He lifted his glass. "I just think," he continued, voice bright, "that if you want to provide for your family, you don't hide behind flexibility." The word hung there. Hide. That was new. Vanessa smirked. "Come on, Marcus. Rachel's just pacing herself." More laughter. My hands were calm on the table. That surprised me. I thought about the Keystone partners reviewing retention rates, about the wire transfer scheduled for the next morning, about the employees who would officially join the new structure under my leadership. Hide. If they only knew how much of my life had been built after everyone else went to bed. At 6:58 in the evening, Marcus leaned back and delivered the line he'd rehearsed for years. "If you had done something with your life," he said, looking directly at me, "I wouldn't have to explain you to people." There was a sharp intake of breath somewhere near the end of the table. He continued almost gently, "She's just not built to provide." And then a vibration against wood. Marcus's phone. He glanced down, annoyed at the interruption. Another buzz. Vanessa's phone this time. Then someone else's. 3 devices nearly in sync. Marcus frowned at his screen. The color drained from his face slowly. Not dramatically, just enough that the shift was visible. Vanessa looked at her own phone and stopped smiling. "What is it?" someone asked. No one answered immediately. Marcus's lips parted, closed, parted again. He looked at me. "This is you?" he asked quietly. Across the table, Vanessa turned her phone outward. The headline was large enough to read from where I sat. Montgomery Solutions acquired by Keystone Capital for $35 million. Beneath it, a photo. Me, navy blazer, neutral expression. Lake Michigan behind me. Silence spread outward from the center of the table like a ripple in still water. Sophia blinked, looked from the phone to me. "Mom." Marcus's hand trembled slightly where it held the device. "This can't be right," he said. "It is," I replied. No anger, no triumph, just fact. The article was from the Regional Business Journal. The push notifications had gone out to subscribers, several of whom were sitting at that table. Vanessa scrolled frantically. It says majority acquisition, retaining leadership role, projected expansion. Her voice faded. Someone near the far end whispered, 35 million. Marcus stared at me like he was trying to recalibrate gravity. "You didn't tell me," he said. "You never asked what I was building," I answered. The room remained frozen. For years he had been the narrator, the interpreter, the filter through which my life was explained. Now the story had arrived without him, and it was louder than any defense I'd ever offered. But the night wasn't done. Because headlines were only the first layer. There was another truth sitting in my briefcase upstairs. And if he tried to rewrite this moment, if he claimed it as his, I was finally ready to show the ink. No one reached for the mashed potatoes after that. It was a strange detail to notice in the middle of something seismic, but I remember it clearly. The bowl sat untouched, steam thinning into nothing as 22 people stared at their phones and then at me. Marcus was still holding his. His thumb hovered over the screen as if he could swipe the headline away. "This has to be some mistake," he said, voice thinner than I'd ever heard it. "Rachel, what is this?" "It's the closing," I replied. "The closing of what?" Vanessa demanded, standing halfway out of her chair. "You run a consulting gig. Since when does that turn into?" She looked down at her phone again. $35 million. "Since 3 years ago," I said. My tone didn't rise. Didn't need to. Sophia leaned forward, elbows on the table. Her eyes were wide, scanning the article like it might change if she blinked. "It says you have clients in 7 states, she said quietly. "You hired a team." "I did." Marcus's gaze snapped back to me. "Team," he repeated. "Yes. And you didn't tell me." His voice carried more accusation than curiosity. I let that sit for a moment. "For 6 years," I said, "you told people I was floating." "That's not what I said. You called me flexible, tinkering, hiding." The room was so still I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. "I was trying to motivate you," he shot back. "You think this happened in a vacuum? Maybe my pushing did something." There it was, the instinct to claim authorship. Vanessa nodded slightly, as if that explanation restored balance. I reached down beside my chair and lifted the briefcase I'd brought in with me. The sound of the clasps opening was small, but in that silence it felt amplified. I pulled out a thin folder and placed it on the table in front of him. "This didn't happen because you pushed," I said. "It happened because I learned not to let anyone else control the narrative." He stared at the folder but didn't touch it. "What is that?" he asked. "Documentation." "Of what?" "Of the job offer I lost 2 years after my father's stroke." The air shifted again. Vanessa frowned. "What job offer?" Marcus's face went completely still. I slid a printed email across the table. It was a copy. I'd kept the original in a safe at home, but this one was enough. From HR@northfieldlogistics.com. Subject: follow-up regarding manager role. The email was short, professional, carefully worded. It referenced concerns raised by a family member regarding long-term reliability. Marcus didn't need to read the sender's name to know which company it was. "You called them," I said quietly. "That's absurd," he replied too quickly. I met his eyes. "They told me a family member reached out. You were the only one who knew." Vanessa shifted uncomfortably. "Marcus," she looked at him sharply. "I was protecting us." "From what?" I asked. "From you overcommitting again," he said. "From you failing publicly. Do you know how that reflects on a family?" The honesty of it seemed to surprise even him. Sophia looked between us like she just realized a foundation had cracks. "You sabotaged her job," she asked her father. "I didn't sabotage anything," he snapped. I clarified reality. The word landed hard. Reality. 4 years, he'd been the curator of it. I was making more money than I ever had when that offer came, I said. And I was still caring for my father. I could have done both. You were stretched thin. I was capable. The distinction mattered. My father-in-law cleared his throat. Marcus, did you really call them? He didn't answer immediately. His silence was answer enough. Across the table, Sophia's face drained of color. You told me Mom just wasn't ambitious, she said. Marcus's voice cracked. She wasn't then. I was working nights building Montgomery, I said. And you didn't tell me, he shot back. Because the last time you knew about an opportunity, you killed it. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. Something inside the room broke open. Not dramatically, not like glass shattering. More like the quiet collapse of scaffolding that had been propped up too long. Vanessa sank back into her chair. So you've been running this company for 3 years? She asked. Yes. And tonight it just closed. Marcus's shoulders slumped slightly. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked unsure of his footing. You made me look like a fool, he whispered. I almost laughed at that. I didn't plan the publication date, I said. I didn't coordinate it with your dinner. His eyes flashed. You could have told me. Would you have told the truth? I asked. That stopped him. The answer hovered unspoken. Would he have stood at this table and said, my wife built a company worth millions? Or would he have said, see what happens when I demand more? I knew the answer. Everyone else was starting to see it too. Sophia leaned back slowly. All those dinners, she said. All those times you. I was trying to keep us respectable, Marcus interrupted. By shrinking her? Sophia asked. The question hung heavier than any headline. I closed the briefcase and set it down beside me. This isn't about revenge, I said. I didn't build Montgomery to embarrass you. Then why didn't you say anything? He asked again. Because every time I tried to speak for myself, you corrected me. No one laughed. No one reached for wine. The room had stopped being a stage. It had become a mirror. And for the first time in 6 years, the reflection wasn't the one Marcus had rehearsed. But the night wasn't finished. Because headlines expose success. They don't expose patterns. And there were still years of small, quiet erasure sitting between us that hadn't been named. Not yet. There's a specific kind of silence that settles when a room realizes it's been complicit. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's the absence of laughter where laughter used to live. Marcus was still seated at the head of the table, but he no longer looked like the host. He looked like someone who had misplaced something essential. This is being blown out of proportion, he said finally, straightening his spine. Families push each other. That's normal. Calling a hiring manager behind someone's back isn't pushing, Vanessa muttered. He shot her a warning look. You don't understand the context. I understand what I just read, she replied, nodding toward the email. Sophia hadn't taken her eyes off me. Mom, she said quietly. Why didn't you ever tell me? I exhaled slowly. Because I didn't want you choosing sides, I said. And because I thought if I just worked hard enough, the truth would be obvious. Marcus laughed once, sharp and humorless. Truth, he said. You mean secrecy? No, I replied. I mean survival. His face tightened. Survival from what? Me? Yes. The word didn't echo, but it might as well have. His hands curled into fists on the tablecloth. You're acting like I abused you, he said. I'm saying you controlled the story, I answered. Every version of me that left this house went through you first. My father-in-law cleared his throat again, voice lower this time. Marcus, is that fair? He looked at him as if he'd betrayed her. I carried this family, he said. When her income dropped, I picked up extra hours. I handled the bills. I kept things stable. That's true, I said. You did. The acknowledgement seemed to disarm him for a moment. But stability doesn't give you ownership of someone else's voice. Sophia leaned forward. Did you really think Mom couldn't provide? She asked. Marcus hesitated. I thought she wasn't aiming high enough, he said carefully. And you decided what high enough was? I replied. Yes, he snapped. Because someone had to. That was the core of it. Control disguised as responsibility. I reached into the briefcase one more time. There's something else, I said. Marcus's shoulders stiffened. I didn't bring this to humiliate you, I continued. I brought it because if tonight turns into another rewritten story, I'm done staying quiet. I placed a small voice recorder on the table. Vanessa blinked. What's that? Documentation, I said again. 2 years ago, after the HR call, I'd gone back to the logistics company and requested clarification. They wouldn't provide names, but they had forwarded the voicemail transcript attached to the internal report. I'd kept it. Marcus's voice, measured, polished, concerned. I love my wife, he'd said, but she has a history of overextending herself. Her personal obligations make long-term commitment risky. The transcript sat printed in black ink. He didn't need to read it to recognize the phrasing. I was protecting our reputation, he whispered. From me succeeding? I asked. That's not fair. Neither was deciding I couldn't handle my own life. The room felt smaller now. Vanessa ran a hand through her hair. Marcus, that's not pushing. That's controlling. He looked around the table as if searching for reinforcement. No one met his eyes. Sophia's voice was barely above a whisper. You told me she wasn't driven, she said. You said some women are comfortable being average. I felt that one land in my chest. I never said average, he protested. You implied it, Sophia replied. He stood abruptly, chair scraping against hardwood. This is unbelievable, he said. You're all acting like I committed a crime. No, I said evenly. You committed a pattern. The words seemed to settle over the table like dust. Pattern. Years of small corrections, jokes framed as motivation, public sympathy crafted carefully. I stood too, not towering, not aggressive, just upright. I built Montgomery in silence because silence was the only space I had left, I said. I didn't announce contracts because the last time I announced something it disappeared. His expression shifted then. Not anger, something closer to realization. You didn't trust me, he said softly. I learned not to. The honesty of that hung between us. My father-in-law looked older suddenly. I thought you two were just competitive, he said quietly. I didn't realize. He didn't finish the sentence. No one needed him to. Marcus's voice cracked. I never meant to hurt you. I know, I replied. And I did. That was the complicated part. He hadn't set out to destroy me. He'd set out to shape the narrative, to maintain an image, to make sure we were perceived as rising. I just hadn't fit the picture he wanted. I didn't build this to embarrass you, I said again. But I won't shrink to protect you either. He sat back down slowly. The fight had drained out of his posture. So what happens now? Vanessa asked quietly. That was the real question. Not about money, not about headlines, about the architecture of what came next. I looked at Marcus. For me, I said, this only works one way. He met my gaze. You stop speaking for me in public, in private. If someone asks what I do, I answer. He nodded faintly. You tell the family what actually happened with the job offer, I continued. No spin. His jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. And we get help, I said. Not because we're dramatic, because patterns don't fix themselves. The word therapy hovered without being spoken. Sophia exhaled slowly, like she'd been holding her breath for years. Marcus's eyes were wet now. Not performative, not theatrical. Real. I don't know how to not control things, he admitted quietly. That's honest, I said. For the first time all night, there was no edge in my voice, just clarity. The headlines would fade. The valuation would become background noise. What would last was this moment. Whether we chose to rebuild differently or not at all. The last car pulled out of the driveway at 10:42 in the evening. I remember because I stood at the front window and watched the red tail lights disappear at the end of our street. The house was quiet in a way it hadn't been in years. Not tense, not brittle, just stripped. Marcus was still at the dining table, staring at the linen cloth like it had betrayed him. Sophia hovered near the hallway, uncertain whether to retreat or stay. I walked back into the room and began stacking plates, not to avoid conversation, to ground myself. The wire transfer would hit my account in the morning. The press coverage would circulate for weeks. Keystone's integration team would begin onboarding on Monday. But in that moment, the only thing that mattered was whether the architecture of our home could be rebuilt without someone standing smaller than they were. Marcus broke the silence first. I didn't realize I was doing that, he said quietly. I didn't answer immediately. Not because I wanted to punish him with silence, because I wanted my response to be clean. You didn't realize because it benefited you, I said finally. Kept you in control. He nodded once, barely. Sophia stepped forward. I owe you an apology, Mom, she said. I believed the version that was easiest. I looked at her and saw something shift. Not guilt, growth. You were a kid, I replied. You listened to the loudest voice in the room. She swallowed. That won't happen again. The promise wasn't grand. Didn't need to be. Marcus stood slowly. What are you asking for? He said. There it was. Not defensive, not combative, just direct. I'm not asking for revenge, I said. I don't want you humiliated. I don't want you erased the way I was. He flinched at that. I want 3 things. He straightened, bracing. First, you tell the family the truth about the job offer. Not tonight. Not dramatically, but clearly. He nodded, jaw tight. Second, you stop narrating my life. If someone asks what I do, you don't edit it. You don't soften it. You don't make it small. His eyes filled again. And third, I continued. We get help. A counselor. Someone who can help us see the patterns we're too close to notice. Sophia exhaled slowly. Marcus didn't speak for several seconds. I don't know how to let go of control, he admitted. That's not something you fix alone, I said. He looked at me differently then. Not as a project, not as a liability, as a person. Did you ever think about leaving? He asked quietly. Yes. The honesty landed between us without accusation. What stopped you? My father, I said, and the belief that maybe one day the truth would stand up on its own. He let out a shaky breath. I never wanted you small, he said. I know, I replied. But wanting the right thing and doing the right thing aren't always the same. Sophia stepped back toward the hallway. I'm going to give you 2 space, she said softly. When she disappeared upstairs, the house felt larger. Marcus walked to the kitchen and began rinsing dishes beside me. We worked in silence for a while, not avoidance, processing. I thought if we looked successful, he said eventually, it meant we were safe. From what? From being judged. From being less. I understood that more than he expected. Safety doesn't come from shrinking someone else, I said. He nodded. Upstairs, I placed the briefcase in the closet and locked it. Not to hide it, but to signal that the money wasn't the point anymore. The next morning, the wire transfer cleared. $35 million. I paid off the mortgage before breakfast. I transferred a portion into a trust for my father's care. I set aside funds for Sophia's education without announcing it. Marcus watched the notifications appear on my phone. He didn't comment. Later that afternoon, he called his sister. I overheard part of it from the hallway. I need to clarify something, he said, about Rachel. About the job offer years ago. His voice wasn't polished. It wasn't curated. It was honest. That mattered more than the article. That evening, I drove to my father's house. He was sitting in his recliner, reading something worn and determined. You look lighter, he said as I stepped inside. I might be. He studied me carefully. Did you win? He asked. I thought about the table, the headlines, the wire transfer. I didn't win, I said. I stopped losing. He smiled at that. Good, he replied. Winning is noisy. Peace isn't. On the drive home, I realized something I hadn't understood at the beginning of the story. I didn't build Montgomery to prove Marcus wrong. I built it because silence was the only space I had left. And I refused to fill it with bitterness. If you've ever sat at a table where your name was spoken with pity, where someone else narrated your worth, I want you to hear this clearly. You don't have to build a multi-million-dollar company to reclaim your voice. You don't need headlines. You don't need applause. You need boundaries. You need architecture. Love without boundaries is just a door without a lock. Anyone can walk in and rearrange your story. Tonight our house is quieter. Not perfect, not magically healed, but honest. And honest is where rebuilding begins. If this story felt familiar, if you've ever been the one labeled not enough while caring more than anyone saw, I want to know. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what part of this hit home. We have more stories like this about quiet strength, messy families, and the moment when truth stands up on its own. Subscribe so you don't miss them. Let's keep building something real.